In the last video, I showed you how to take one URL and have AI give you a one-liner description about that company, then categorize it across different industries. Now, in the real world, you're often dealing with large lists of information. So in this video, let's take this Google Sheet, which has a list of URLs, and let's do the same thing we did before, but for each one. So for each of these companies, we want to get a one-liner and then categorize them and update this Google Sheet. So as a reminder, this flow right here categorizes and gets the one-liner. So we take an input, we scrape the website, grab all its text, and have AI give us a one-liner right here, and then categorize it and write to Google Sheet. So we want to run this flow for each row in our Google Sheet for each company. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new subflow. This is a new flow in my workbook. I'm going to call this read companies. So it's going to go to Google Sheet and read each row in our Google Sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and add a node. I want a Sheets node. And we're going to connect this to the same sheet we have in our previous. I'm going to take this company tracker. And if we run this, it's going to go ahead and return each row in our Google Sheet. If I view outputs, I go into company URL. I don't just have IBM, not just that input we had before. I have 3 different URLs. Now, what I want to do here is for each one of those URLs, I want to run this flow. So I want to replace this input right here with each item in our list. Now, this is where I introduce the concept of subflows. Subflows, they take the output of a node in one flow and run another flow. So I'm going to click plus, go into my subflow library, and I see I have company info in category, which is the flow we created in video 1. And what it has here as input is a URL. So I'm going to connect my list of company URLs to the input of this subflow. This is saying for each row in my Google Sheet, go ahead and run this subflow. Go ahead and get that company's one-liner and a brief description, and then write it to Google Sheets. Let's run this flow and understand what's going on. So what this is now doing is that it's for each row in our Google Sheet, it's going to go ahead and execute our subflow. And we can see on the right that it is completing that work. So if we go over to our sheet, what we see is that it's created new rows for each company that we've passed in as input. Now, that's not quite what we want. We're currently writing to Google Sheet for each input. What we want instead is to update. So I'm going to delete that node. I'm going to go back to Google Sheets, add an updater node. I'm going to connect the same file we had previously. And now it's just a question of mapping our values. I want to always update on the URL. I want to grab the industry and the one-liner from the previous step. Now, if we run this one more time, we're going to get the output that we expect, which is getting a one-liner and the company category automatically updated in Google Sheets. Now that we have the flow working the way we want, there are a few things I want to bring your attention to. The first is loop mode. When we connected the company URL to the input of our subflow, that node went into loop mode. Loop mode means you are going to execute a node or a subflow for each item in a list. In our case, it's going to go ahead and take each URL and run the subflow and get the one-liner and the category, and then update the Google Sheet for each company URL. The second thing I want to bring your attention to is what would happen if we had a URL which was an error. Let me just put a random URL like that, and let's rerun this flow. Now, the expectation is that the AI won't be able to analyze the information because we can't scrape that website would result in a 404. We see that it's failed. So to avoid failures stopping our flows from running, we can add an error shield. So I'm going to go ahead and add an error shield. And I'm going to drop my subflow into that error shield. This is saying if one of our loops fail, continue running the automation. And now if we run this flow again, even though one of the steps in the subflow fails because there's an error, we can still complete the whole automation. It's going to process each additional item, each additional URL in our sheet. So that is how you take a flow which has one single input and turn it into a subflow and have it iterate over different items in a list. In our case, getting a one-liner and industry for a list of companies. In the next video, I'll cover how to do more advanced things in Gumloop, like connect to custom APIs and much more. I'll see you there.